Hello, everybody, and welcome back into the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show, guys. Today, I am going to be talking about wide receiver studs and duds for the first 2 weeks of the football season, and I'm going to be talking about who I think is going to continue at the pace that they've been at and who I think is going to fizzle out. I'm also going to talk about some players that have underperformed so far that might start to perform a little bit better. Okay, guys? If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and I ask if you do like the content today, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. I do appreciate it, guys. All right, guys, today was a really fun day of football. That Chiefs-Ravens game to end the Sunday slate of games was very exciting to watch. I hope you guys got to see it. But anyway, guys, like I said, I'm going to be going into my wide receivers, so I'm going to start with a couple of the Rams wide receivers. Guys, we saw Cooper Kupp go off for a second week in a row. This dude has seen double-digit targets in weeks 1 and 2. Very exciting. He's found the end zone both weeks and had 100-plus yards receiving both weeks. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Matt Stafford likes Cooper Kupp just a little bit, okay? And then I wanted to talk about Robert Woods a little bit. Guys, if you drafted Robert Woods, it is not time to panic. In fact, I think that the Cooper Kupp production is actually a really good sign for Robert Woods, as weird as that sounds, because this is not a wide receiver duo where one receiver is going to dominate the volume and the production all season long. These guys are going to kind of swap production weeks. For example, Robert Woods could have a huge week next week where he turns out over 100 yards, a touchdown, and he gets the lead amount of targets. He had 9 targets in week 2, so the targets were up from week 1. That's a good sign. It's not going to be a situation where Cooper Kupp dominates like this all season long. There's going to be weeks where Robert Woods is the receiver with the better fantasy production, with the higher number of targets, the higher number of touchdowns, and the higher number of yardage. Okay, so absolutely do not put Robert Woods on your bench, guys. Just because he hasn't performed in weeks 1 and 2 does not mean anything. This dude still has a very high ceiling, and he's going to give you huge weeks like we saw Cooper Kupp do this week. So don't put him on your bench. This is not going to be a wide receiver that you bench at any point during the season, okay, guys? Keep Robert Woods on your team. Don't even think about dropping him. Don't even think about putting him on your bench. You're playing Robert Woods here going forward. He's got a lot of potential to get you a lot of fantasy points, okay, guys? So, and then I wanted to move on to the Tampa Bay wide receivers. Like I said in my last video, Mike Evans is going to be the volume hog this week. These numbers always even themselves out. Chris Godwin dominated the targets in week 1. Mike Evans dominated the targets in week 2 and got in the end zone twice, guys. Make no mistake, Mike Evans is the best wide receiver on this team. Here's the deal with Bucs wide receivers going forward, because it can be kind of confusing, and I want to clear this up for you guys, okay? So you got the three-headed monster of Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, and Mike Evans. Here's how this works. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are going to get the majority of the targets throughout the season, and Antonio Brown's going to be third fiddle as far as targets are concerned. So Antonio Brown is a little bit of a risky play, all right? Just know that. Moving on to Godwin and Evans. They are both going to be very safe floor players, okay? They're on a very good offense, and they're going to be targeted heavily throughout the season because these guys are volume hog receivers. They're going to be getting targeted a lot by Tom Brady. There's going to be weeks where Godwin gets more targets than Evans, and Evans gets more targets than Godwin, okay? It's just going to kind of flip-flop. With that being said, they're both very safe plays because they have good chances of getting in the end zone, and you know that they're going to get a lot of targets. Now, when it comes to the ceiling, Mike Evans is the more talented wide receiver and more of the big play wide receiver, so he's going to have the higher ceiling. If by some chance that you have both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin on the same fantasy team and you have a debate of which one you want to play, you're always going to be playing Mike Evans. There's going to be weeks where Godwin outperforms him, but at the end of the year, Mike Evans will end up with more fantasy points and is the better fantasy asset. Okay, so that's how you assess Bucs wide receivers going forward, okay? And then I want to move on to, okay, this is another receiver I wanted to talk about, okay, guys? Henry Ruggs. Henry Ruggs finally had himself a 100-yard game, but in 15 NFL games, he's only had 2 100-yard games, okay? He found the end zone. That's great, but we all know that touchdowns can be a little bit random, and we want receivers that are going to give us consistent 100-yard performances. Here's the deal with Henry Ruggs. He is a boomer bust type of wide receiver. I hate to tell you that, Henry Ruggs fans. he runs a 4.2. He's really exciting to watch and everything like that. And he had a 60-yard touchdown catch today. That's great. Fantastic. Whatever. Okay. Henry Ruggs is not going to be a consistent fantasy wide receiver for quite some time. There's always the chance that he evolves into that later in his career, but for the moment, he's a boom or bust flex option at best. Okay, so you're not going to be looking at Henry Ruggs as a wide receiver 1 or a high end or even low end wide receiver 2. This dude is a wide receiver 3 flex option. Okay, so don't get too excited about Henry Ruggs, but you can definitely play him at your flex and expect some occasional upside. All right. So that's how to look at Henry Ruggs going forward. Another receiver I wanted to talk about, and this is a fun one, guys, because I talked about him. Anybody that watched my videos at the beginning of the year on my top 5 wide receivers, I had Terry McLaurin in my top 5 wide receivers at my number 4 wide receiver for the year. And boy, is it starting to look like that might be a possibility. Okay, even with Heineke playing quarterback, Terry McLaurin was targeted 14 times. The dude had 11 catches for 107 yards, and he got in the end zone. This dude is going to be an absolute target hog for this Washington team, and there's actually a chance that the offense ends up running through Terry McLaurin and not through Antonio Gibson, which is not too much of a surprise to me because this dude is just such an elite talent. And it kind of reminded me of watching a prime Julio Jones, to be honest with you. The way that Matt Ryan used to force feed Julio Jones the ball, and it's like all they did was pass the ball to Julio Jones. That's what I felt like watching the Washington football team play the Giants on Thursday. It's like all they did was target Terry McLaurin. The dude literally caught 33% of the team's passes. I mean, this is just absolutely insane volume, and they're going to keep force feeding him the ball because nobody can cover him. Eventually, teams might have to, try to double team him, but until then, this dude is going to be an absolute fantasy monster, and I don't see any team being able to shut him down this year. This dude is just downright unstoppable. So you're starting Terry McLaurin from now on with absolute confidence. This dude is a solid locked-in wide receiver 1, and he's one of the most talented wide receivers in football. Okay, while we're on the subject of the Giants and Redskins or Washington football team, whatever, I wanted to talk about Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard has had a really good start to the season. He had 113 yards in week 1, 94 yards in week 2. The dude's been getting a lot of targets. But I would temper your expectations with Sterling Shepard because he's not even the number 1 wide receiver on his team. The positive side of Sterling Shepard is I think the Giants' offense is going to be a little bit overall better than we thought it was going into the season. Daniel Jones looked really good in that game. And, I think that Sterling Shepard can definitely have some good weeks, but the problem is he's not going to give you any sort of consistent production because you've got Kenny Golladay and Darius Slayton there in New York, and Kenny Golladay is still a clear-cut number 1 on the team. It hasn't been like that so far this year, but Kenny Golladay is the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver, and Darius Slayton is going to see just as many targets as Sterling Shepard. And so they just have so many guys to pass the ball to, and Sterling Shepard isn't really a wide receiver 1 to begin with. So even though he's had a really, really good start to the season, I would temper your expectations with Sterling Shepard and never, ever consider this dude as a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2. He is a flex option at best. Don't get too excited about him. Okay. And then, moving on. Okay, so the Cincinnati Bengals wide receiving core is another one that I wanted to talk about because we have kind of a 3-headed monster here in Cincinnati as far as the wide receiving core. And, you got T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Jamar Chase. Okay, Tyler Boyd's been very quiet so far. I expect him to have a decent season, but the point is this dude is never going to be seen as the 1, probably even the 2 wide receiver on the team with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins there. So when we're looking at Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, here's what I want you guys to understand. T. Higgins is still the number 1 wide receiver on this team. I understand that Jamar Chase has had a really good start to the season. He's seen the end zone in both weeks 1 and 2, and he's commanded a decent amount of targets, but T. Higgins led the team in targets this week with 10 targets, and you're going to see that pretty consistently for the rest of the year for the Bengals. I promise you that T. Higgins is still the number 1 wide receiver on this team. He's had more targets so far than Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase has just had freaky production as far as making his targets worth it, essentially. Like, he hasn't had as many targets as T. Higgins, but he's really made the best of the targets that he's gotten. And he is a very talented wide receiver that's going to get you fantasy production. I just don't want you to start looking at him as a wide receiver one, because he's not even the best wide receiver on this team. T. Higgins is the best wide receiver on this team, and that's how he needs to be looked at going forward. He's the only wide receiver that you could even consider as a high-end wide receiver two. None of these guys are going to be wide receiver ones this year, but T. Higgins is a high-end wide receiver two, while Jamar Chase is more of a mid to low-end wide receiver two, and Tyler Boyd is definitely a wide receiver three flex option. So that's how I would assess the Bengals wide receivers going forward. So that's pretty much it for the wide receivers today. I just wanted to give you guys my assessment of those wide receivers that might be kind of confusing to understand. So hopefully that cleared some things up for you guys. Again, it's only week 2, but we want to use all of the information that we have at our disposal to make educated decisions going forward and figure out how to assess our wide receivers and who to plug into our lineups on game day so we can get the most amount of points and get some wins and win some money. All right, guys. So that's my advice for you today. I am going to be getting at you guys tomorrow before the Monday Night Football game to talk about some more things that I saw this week. And I am going to be doing my waiver wire show Tuesday and rankings all throughout the week for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions. So make sure to tune in for those episodes, guys. All right, guys, fun day of football. I've enjoyed having you guys here on my show today, and I will catch you later.